Bees have been around for millions of years, so they've seen a lot of environmental changes, and they've survived through adaptation, mainly migrating to places where food is available and weather conditions are better suited to shelter themselves, their hive, and their children. Today, bees and other pollinators are facing many pressing issues, either directly related to or amplified by climate change. And the big question is, can they adapt to our current climate change conditions?
At some level, yes, they can, and at other levels, no, they can't. Bees in general, in order to establish populations, need two things. They need a place to nest, and they need food to eat. Climate change can affect both of those elements that are just essential to establish populations. For example, fires are always on the front of our mind out here in the West. It obliterates nesting sites for pollinators, and those pollinators won't be able to establish in those areas until conditions become more supportive to them. When it comes to climate change effects on the food that they eat, well, there's a little, more play in the system there, in that plants that will, because of warmer temperatures, bloom earlier will match up with pollinators that can build populations earlier or emerge from wintering earlier. And so there'll be selection in favor of those particular phenotypes and genotypes. So it just depends on what kind of factors that we're talking about when referring to whether pollinators can adapt to climate change.
That's Dr. Gloria DeGrandi-Hoffman, research leader at the Carl Hayden Bee Research Center in Tucson, Arizona. DeGrandi-Hoffman noted that climate change has exacerbated the four Ps that are often linked to colony losses or decline: poor nutrition, pesticides, pathogens, and parasites.
We're never going to really solve the situation of colony losses without addressing climate change and starting to make management changes in how we look at commercial colonies and how we manage them, how we manage landscapes to support feral pollinator populations. Let's try to find these solutions in a climate that is changing, and with the realization that we're going to have to find these solutions under conditions of heat and drought and warmer winters and nutritional stress, and factor that into the solutions. And so that's what the Grand Challenge is about.
DeGrandi-Hoffman is leading a grand challenge here at ARS to create pollinator landscapes and overwintering practices to increase pollinator populations. The Grand Challenge addresses three primary issues. First, looking at how environmental change affects nutrients in plants and making that information publicly available.
Anybody who wants to know what plants should I put in my backyard, or should I plant in this open area that I have that are the best for supporting pollinators, will be able to go to the plants database and get that information. There'll be a pollinator section with both nutrient analysis, the time of bloom for pollinator plants, but also the bees that visit them.
The second goal of the Grand Challenge is to zoom out to a landscape level and determine where pollinator populations can be supported. The third goal is to develop recommendations for commercial and backyard beekeepers to manage their colonies in their changing environment. This includes overwintering, a key component of bee survival, but also an area that can be tough to manage.
Getting bees through the winter has become increasingly difficult, particularly in some of the temperate areas of the United States, where temperatures that are conducive for flight, and that's any temperature over 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you can have quite a few bees flying. And when they fly, they age. You want the bees to be in the colony and flying very little by mid-October. And when you have those bees flying on into November, it corrupts the age structure of the colonies. You get too many old bees in there. And when spring comes around and they start flying again, the bees start dying at a rate that exceeds the emergence of new bees in the colony. And so the population declines, right?
Living in Maryland since the 80s, I've certainly seen changes in our weather, especially a much longer winter, but with sporadic days of warmth mixed in. During one of those 70 or even 80-degree days in the dead of winter, I'll see bees buzzing around my grass and trees, but they don't have anything to eat because nothing in my yard is flowering. It's interesting to learn that those extra days flying around during the winter can actually age the bee population.
The thing with honeybees is they're really tied together as a population. You need bees to make bees. And if bees that you have are declining, you can't make enough bees to sort of pull that population back up. And that's what we call a colony loss in the early spring.
According to DeGrandi-Hoffman, bees need to overwinter, which means staying in hibernation from late fall to early spring. This is a common practice for commercial beekeepers, but managing bees during the winter can be challenging. I mean, parents have a hard enough time keeping their kids from going outside during a warm winter day. Imagine trying to manage 60,000 bees. That's why DeGrandi-Hoffman and her team are developing guidance for beekeepers to help them overwinter their bees.
Honeybees are among just a few number of insects that are active all year long. And as colonies go into winter, they'll stop rearing brood and they'll start taking the nutrients that they get from fall pollens and store those nutrients in their fat bodies. And then when temperatures drop below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, those bees will start to cluster in the colony. And they shiver and they keep warm. They spend the duration of the winter as this tight nest of bees. When the colony is in a cluster like that, the bees aren't aging like they do when they forage. Forage creates a lot of stress on bees.
To avoid foraging during warm days in the winter, beekeepers are increasingly putting their colonies in cold storage.
So now we take these colonies, put them in cold storage where it's constant temperature of about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and you just leave them in there. You pull them out when, for example, you're going to go pollinate almonds, or when the first pollens start to become available where you live, and you can pull them out. The colonies seem to do much better under those conditions.
The other issue being tackled by the Grand Challenge is bee migration due to climate change. ARS scientists are already seeing some pollinators move further north or to higher elevations to escape harsh conditions like drought, flooding, and wildfires.
For example, during the Ice Age and during other planetary events, they moved to places where they could, establish their populations. And that's happening now. Honeybees and other pollinators are moving, for example, into higher elevations or further north. And that causes local areas to have fewer pollinators in them because the conditions there aren't supportive.
While many pollinators will move to greener pastures, so to speak, DeGrandi-Hoffman noted that certain species of bees may choose to stay in a difficult environment, which greatly diminishes their chance of survival.
Pollinators that forage on specific flowers and have that tight relationship are clearly going to be the most susceptible to loss. There's no safety net for them if they lose nesting sites, or there's not enough forage for them to support themselves and also rear offspring. So yeah, it's difficult to adapt to catastrophic weather events. I mean, you have selection pressure on those colonies, and you have colonies that can adapt and survive. But if they only make up 30 to 40% of all the colonies that you have, and the other 70 die, I mean, that's what we're calling massive colony losses. Adaptation and selection are happening all the time. It's just that how it's played out and what the results are may not be something we want to see. For example, not having pollinators where you live anymore.
DeGrandi-Hoffman and her team are studying ways to keep bees in their native environments, which will greatly help growers pollinate their plants and keep their costs down.
The two areas that we're looking at in particular is how heat and drought can be affecting the nutrients that are available to bees in the pollen, and also how it affects flowering in plants. It's a basic question as to how do the growing conditions of plants ultimately affect the rewards that they're capable of presenting to pollinators.
Climate change is happening, and trying to fight it on the fly is a tremendous challenge. I asked DeGrandi-Hoffman what gives her optimism that we can meet this grand challenge and protect our pollinators.
One of the things that gives me great optimism is that, I asked a lot of folks once we started this grand challenge if they wanted to be part of it. And folks jumped at the chance to work in this interdisciplinary framework to solve this problem. I think we've got increasing awareness by so many different groups across the United States about the need for pollinators, but also about how we can reverse the effects of climate change. It was Margaret Mead who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." We're all going to be part of this solution. We all need to be. And we can change the world with it. We can reverse climate change. We can build our pollinator populations. But it's going to take all of us working together to be able to pull it off.
Be on the lookout for our new episode next week, where we find out what is stressing out bees. The answer may leave you itching and scratching.